Okay, we're going to get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Ave Maria Press Professional Development Webinar Series. Our goal in this series is to provide parish staff and volunteers and diocesan ministers the formation, training, and tools they need to create vibrant Catholic parishes and growing ministries. In today's webinar, DescKatie Prejean McGrady will speak on what we do now that the Synod on Young People is over. My name is Erin Pierce. I am the Parish and Curriculum Marketing Specialist at Ave Maria Press. Before we begin our webinar, we'd like to recognize our webinar partners: the National Conference for Catechetical Leadership, the National Association of Catholic Family Life Ministers, the National Association for Lay Ministry, and the National Federation of Priests' Councils. Everyone in the audience is muted today, but you are able to ask questions. Questions may be sent to our presenters using the questions section of the GoToWebinar panel, which you can see displayed here. I will read as many of those questions as possible at the end of the presentation today. Also, this webinar is being recorded, and a link to that recording will be sent to you later this week via email. With that, I would like to extend a very warm welcome to our presenter today. DescKatie Prejean McGrady is a Catholic speaker and the author of Room 24, Follow, and her recent book, Lent, which she co-authored with her husband, Tommy McGrady. She served as one of 3 delegates for the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops to the pre-synod meeting on young people, the faith, and vocational discernment in Rome in 2018. DescKatie also led a new initiative with Ave Maria Press called Ave Explores, the Synod on Young People. Along with other contributors, DescKatie walked us through the events of the Synod and reflected on what it means for youth ministry today. DescKatie shares the gospel with enthusiasm, authenticity, and humor, engaging audiences of all ages and sizes. DescKatie, welcome, and thank you for being with us today.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to have this conversation with everyone.
Wonderful. Well, I am going to turn the controls over to you here and make you the presenter.
Fingers crossed, everyone. Okay,
Yes.
Sharing screen 2. Go to webinar. We'll share this screen. Okay, that's my daughter's foot. All right, we're in business. Here we go. All right, everybody. I'm really excited to be having this conversation with you today. I want to tell you from the outset, I apologize. My voice is a little scratchy and congested. This is actually the best it sounded the past couple days. And if you see me glance down, it's merely because I have the baby cam open on my phone because my daughter is in the room behind me with a little bit of a congested nose herself. So she's fighting her nap, probably because she can hear me right now. But she'll go down eventually and we'll get to have this awesome conversation. The Synod on Young People has really been kind of the focus of my mind really for the past year. It was in December of last year, 2017. I got the phone call from the USCCB inviting me to attend the pre-synod. The pre-synod was in March, and then there was a lot of unpacking of what happened at the pre-synod once our letter was released, and I got to speak to the USCCB in June of last year. And then the synod itself was in October, and now here we are in January of 2019. So 2018 was a blur, and now here we are in January of 2019, and we're all kind of waiting with bated breath for the apostolic exhortation, which will kind of be the Pope's unpacking of what happened at the synod in October, what happened at the pre-synod last March, and really what his vision is for ministry with youth and young adults, and really what the church is called to do when it comes to taking care of young people. And while we're all kind of waiting with this bated breath on what is the church supposed to do about young people and with young people and for young people, I really don't think we have to go very far to kind of figure out the trajectory of what's coming. We can look at the Instrumentum Laboris, so the working document that they used to kind of guide and lead the discussions at the Synod in October. There's a great line right at the beginning where it says that taking care of young people is not an optional task for the church, but an integral part of her vocation and mission and history. right? For a long time, I think in ministry, and I've been involved in youth ministry as a youth myself. I was super involved in high school youth ministry when I was a high school student. I went to a Catholic school, so I was involved in campus ministry, diocesan ministry. I went to my parish life team program. I really had my first kind of moment of encounter with Jesus Christ at a Steubenville youth conference. And then in college, through college campus ministry, and then as a young adult, to different young adult type of events, so theology on taps here in my diocese, and a couple of different young adult retreats. And then when my husband and I got engaged, and through marriage prep, and now as a professional speaker, I really hate to say that, because I don't know that you can professionally talk about Jesus. I love Jesus, and people for some reason pay me to talk about him, and I write books about Jesus. And before that, I was a teacher and a parish youth minister. For a long time, the point I'm trying to make is, for a long time, it seemed that young people have kind of been a footnote. So a select group of people have been focused on and paying attention to how we walk alongside teenagers and young adults through all these different phases of transition in life. But the whole church hasn't maybe been paying attention. And I think now, at this critically important moment, the Pope himself and the body of bishops gathered together at the Synod, and the pre-Synod attendees, and really everybody that's been paying attention, have all kind of come together to say, this is not something that we can put off to the side any longer. This is not something that we can optionally think about when it's convenient or when the young people are a problem. But taking care of our young people, taking care of youth and young adults, is a critically important job and work of the church. Professionally, I'm a speaker. I travel full time, but I'm married. This is my husband, Tommy. He's a parish youth minister and a science teacher. This is our little girl, Rose. So that's the baby. If you hear screaming in a little while, that's the little girl. As you can see, she's a little bit of a ham, and she loves the camera. I travel to 50 to 60 events a year across the United States, Canada, and the United Kingdom, speaking about Jesus, talking about our call to be in relationship with him. I do a bunch of training events with youth ministers and with faculty and with teachers, everything from parish missions to confirmation retreats that are mandatory to the ones that young people want to go to. And for some reason, Ave Maria Press has let me write books for them. And these are my 3 books with Ave Maria Press, which I know there's going to be a discount code given to you at the end of this webinar. So hang on before you go rush to buy them all right now from AveMariaPress.com. Room 24, which is kind of a snapshot of my experience as a Catholic school teacher and how we can accompany young people in the classroom. Follow Your Lifelong Adventure with Jesus, which is very personal and kind of a snapshot of how I have encountered Jesus Christ, and ways that young people can encounter Jesus Christ by reading scripture and praying, and by becoming invested in the sacraments and living a life of service. And then soon to be released, Lent, One Day at a Time for Catholic Teens, the hardest book I think I've ever written, because I had to write it with somebody else whom I love very much, my husband. And it's just a daily book of reflections, specifically for high schoolers and for young adults, about how to walk through Lent one day at a time. My husband and I also have a podcast called The Electric Waffle, where we talk about all sorts of stuff, Catholicism, the chaos of our lives, everything from our favorite television shows to our least favorite movies to our favorite desserts and everything in between. And we have a lot of fun with that. And like Erin mentioned when she introduced me a few minutes ago, last December, and as I said, I was invited to attend the pre-synod meeting for young people in March of 2018. It feels like just yesterday, because I'm still in touch with a lot of the people that I met there, but also because, again, it was such a significantly beautiful experience of my life. For the first time ever in the history of the church, as far as we know, the Pope gathered together 300 young adults from around the world to sit down for 5 days and to unpack and to explore what it means to be a Catholic young adult, what we long for from the church, what we desire deeply from Holy Mother Church, how we need the church to guide us, how we have something to contribute to the church. And at this gathering, Pope Francis himself came and spent time with us. In fact, it was really great. He came into the Synod Hall and he beelined it over to this young man that you see right there in the front that he's closest to. That gentleman is in a wheelchair. We had 2 handicapped men and women with us throughout the course of our pre-synod time to kind of give their own experience and testimony of being a disabled young Catholic. And so he beelined it over to this young man to sit down and have a conversation with him right at the beginning of his gathering with all of us. And it just kind of gave us a snapshot of the heart of Pope Francis and who he is as a shepherd, and how he leads us as a church. And this time together, the Pope was with us, and he was full of energy, and he was coming down the walkway. We were all gathered together in this auditorium of sorts, these bright orange chairs in this auditorium, and all the people are gathering together. And the Pope is walking down the aisle, and he's getting closer and closer and closer to the front. And I was 3 seats in on the second row with some of my other American compatriots. And I'm waiting for the Pope to get closer and closer and closer. I'm trying to figure out how do I say hello to him? Like, I'm not close enough to where I can shake his hand, but I'm not far enough away to where I can justify like ignoring this big moment. And so I decided to take a selfie. I turned around and I snapped a selfie with the Pope. And I was pretty excited about it. It's a pretty good picture. I mean, there's all these, blur around, and people are grabbing for him and trying to shake his hand. And somebody close to me had a zucchetto, so the little white hat that you can, go swap with the Pope to take his, and you can get, but there's no like protocol for how to do that. So I'm like super proud of this photo. I throw it up on Instagram. It gets a couple thousand likes. It's a good day on Catholic Instagram. I get home the day after the synod has ended. My husband has it framed and sitting up on the mantelpiece at my house. It's just like, it's a great photo. And then I saw the Vatican's official photo of this moment. And this is the picture of the moment that I took my selfie. And if you'll notice, everybody's looking at the Pope and smiling at the Pope. And then there's little DescKatie Prejean McGrady standing off to the side with her back to the Pope. And if you notice, a couple of different moments in this photo, Cardinal Baldessari, the cardinal right behind the Pope, looks a little mortified that I would take a selfie instead of just smiling at the Pope. But I'm pretty proud of the picture, even though that particular moment might have been embarrassing. But at this pre-synod gathering, and I'm talking about the pre-synod because I think it's important to set up what happens at the synod itself. At this pre-synod gathering, Pope Francis sat down with 300 young adults for 4 hours. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't really have 4 hours in my schedule to do anything at one single time. On a good day, my daughter naps for like 2 hours at a time. And during the course of that 2 hours, in the morning at least, I have to shower and have breakfast and make sure that the house is clean. And then maybe I can get to some emails. And in the afternoon time, I have to run around the house, make sure that the house is clean and dinner is ready, and then maybe get to some more emails. I can only imagine how busy the Pope is. But for 4 hours on a Monday morning, he went to the outskirts of Rome to sit down with 300 young adults and have a conversation. Over the course of that 4 hours, 5 young adult representatives spoke to the Pope, and 5 young adult representatives asked questions of the Pope. And every single time a young adult spoke or a young adult asked a question, Pope Francis responded from the heart. And he also gave us some opening remarks about what he was hoping for from this gathering of young adults there in Rome. And he said something pretty profound that really deeply moved me and kind of gave me a mission both as somebody who works especially with high school students and with young adult students. As a young adult myself, I'm 29 years old, I'm married, I have a young child, I'm making my way in the professional world, I'm a faithful Catholic. So these words were spoken both about the people that I work with and to my heart. And he said this, that young people must be taken seriously. It seems we are surrounded by a culture that on the one hand idolizes youth, trying to prevent its passing, yet on the other excludes many young people from being protagonists. And I think we have to ask ourselves right at the outset, especially if we're working with high school students, if we're working with college students, if we're working with I like to call them the new young adults, right? The ones that have graduated college and they're setting out into the first parts of their career and trying to figure out where they fit in the world, but they don't quite know if they have a place yet. How are we walking alongside young people in all these different phases of life and helping them be protagonists? And when I think of the word protagonist, I am immediately taken back to my favorite book, To Kill a Mockingbird. I was forced to read it when I was a freshman in high school, and now it's one of my favorite books. And if you think about the protagonist in that story, you've got the storyteller, Scout, right? But I really think the protagonist of that story is Atticus Finch, her father, who's taken on this case that's racially charged and telling this story about how she sees her father handle this and how she learns from her father. And if you think about the protagonist of any great book or movie or even a song, right, they're central to the action, they face conflict, they have a supporting cast of characters, but they are memorable, they're valuable, we learn something from them. They're the agents of the story. Well, if we look at this line from Pope Francis when he addressed us young adult delegates and he was talking about young people, right, young people are protagonists. They're central to the action. They have a supporting cast of characters. They face different conflicts and struggles, but they're valued, and their experience and their journey is one to pay attention to. He continued in his speech, he said this, "In the church, I'm convinced it should not be this way, closing the door without listening to those protagonists. Remember, the gospel asks us, its message of closeness invites us to encounter and to exchange, to accept and to love each other seriously, to journey together and to share without fear. And this pre-synodal meeting should be a sign of something great. This gathering of 300 young adults in Rome to talk and to listen to one another is the church's willingness. It's the snapshot of the church's willingness to listen to all the young without exclusion." And then he said this directly to us young people gathered in the room. He said, "If you are not present, and a part of the access to God is missing. When I think about those 5 days in intense conversation with these young adults from around the world, bonus points to the person that can find me in the crowd. And when I think about the time that I spent with my small group, with people literally from all over the world, in this picture alone, we have people from China, Hungary, Germany, Latvia, Belarus, Sweden, Ghana, Ethiopia, and Nigeria. We have somebody from South Korea, somebody from India, somebody from the Philippines, somebody from America, right? This breadth of experience from around the world. We were central to a conversation that led to, I think, really fruitful discussions and conversations at the synod itself, and was a snapshot for how we as church should approach walking alongside young people. That young people are not problems to be solved. Young people are not issues to be handled, that we're not just supposed to treat young people like a footnote on the bottom of a page and, oh, the youth minister, the young adult minister, the person over at the diocese takes care of that kid stuff, but that young people play a vital role in the life of our church, that they have gifts, they have talents to offer, that they have ideas and insights, that their questions are worth listening to, that they long to hear the truth from us, but they will only trust us once we've listened to them. And I think what the Synod on Young People really showed us over the course of the 25 days in October that they gathered was that, again, this was not some sort of a political ploy. And this was not just a showboat of, oh, yeah, young people are important and we know that we need the young in the church, but was really an announcement to every Catholic around the world that young people are not just the hired hands problem at the parish, but that young people are critically important to the life of the church. I was just thinking about this last night. So my New Year's resolution was to read more. I already read a lot, but I read a lot of stuff on my phone. And I told myself I want to read more on paper. And so I keep a Bible by my bed. And last night I'd climbed into bed and I'd tucked myself in and I'd gotten all cozy. And I looked over and the book that I've been reading, I've been working my way through Flannery O'Connor's short stories. I'd left it in the living room. Well, when you're like you're super comfortable in bed and like you just don't want to get out. That's how I was. I was just super comfortable in bed. I didn't want to get out of bed. I didn't want to go get my new book for those Flannery O'Connor short stories, as good as they were. And I didn't want to look at my phone, so I grabbed my Bible and I flipped over to the Gospel of John, which is one of my favorite Gospels, and I started reading it. And there I am going through the prologue, and there I am going through John crying out in the desert, prepare the way of the Lord. And then I get to the moment where he calls Andrew and John for the first time. Come and see, right? We all know the story, John chapter 1, 35 to 42. Go read it. That's your homework assignment. And as I'm reading it and as I'm reflecting on it, I guess maybe this was on my mind, or just the fact that I've got a bunch of events coming up next week with young people. So young people are on the brain. But I thought to myself, wait a second, hang on. So Jesus was 30 when he began his public ministry. And we know that most of the people that Jesus called to walk alongside him, those 12 apostles, were young people themselves. It's not like he was calling 60 and 70-year-old men. Not that 60 and 70-year-old men don't have valuable things to offer to the life of the church. But if you think about Jesus Christ and his mission and the people he walked alongside and the people that walked alongside him in his public ministry for 3 years, they were technically young adults. They were the same age as my friends, as me. I'm 29. I turned 30 in 6 months. Jesus Christ's public ministry started when he was 30 years old. What have I accomplished by 30? Right? It forced me to realize that Jesus Christ spoke into history and acted in history during this very phase of life that the Pope and the bishops thought was valuable to talk about at this moment in human history. And I thought that was critically important. And of course, I need to flesh that thought out more in my head personally as I'm reflecting on it, that young people, again, are not problems and they're not footnotes and they're not issues, but are an integral part of the life and work and mission of the Roman Catholic Church. And so over the course of the Synod in October, I think really three main points and takeaways can really be found from the work of the Synod. Now there's far more to discuss than just these three main takeaways, and I want to make that perfectly clear at the outset. A lot of different people have said a lot of different things about what this Synod talked about the key buzzwords and commentary coming out of the Synod. But for me, as I read the final document, which was just released and just published in English just a few days ago, here's my own personal copy. It got a little banged up in my backpack. You can go find that translated version, by the way, on synod2018.va and download the PDF. But in following the proceedings and reading the different interventions and talking to the people that were there and reflecting on what we talked about at the pre-synod back in March, I really think the three main takeaways of the synod proceedings on young people were this. The first was that there's a transforming power when we listen. Now, I know that sounds a little hippy-dippy, and that doesn't necessarily sound hardcore like Catholic faith, but it actually very much is. And the document reflects intensely how Jesus Christ himself was a masterful listener. So there's this transforming power when we listen and when we are listened to. The second big point was that we as a church have a duty to proclaim truth. And that duty to proclaim truth especially has to happen and especially has to be played out and fulfilled when we are walking alongside young people who ask big questions. But remember, we have that duty to proclaim truth in light of how we are called to listen first. And then thirdly, there's a universal call to holiness. Now, again, that is not a novel idea, right? A lot of Catholicism is just taking off the good ideas of the person that came before you. And obviously, the universal call to holiness is a very Vatican II charged concept. But what I think the Synod talked about in very beautiful terms and really inspiring terms was how young people need to be invited into an exploration of that universal call to holiness, and how young people need to be challenged to understand that sanctity is not an option, but is literally a mandate upon their lives, that they are called to be holy, that their face is called to be on a holy card, that they are one day supposed to be someone people ask the intercession of, and that we can't talk about that in just abstract concepts and terms, but that they themselves are invited to become men and women of deep faith and men and women who strive for heaven. So from those three main takeaways, the Synod did a really great job of kind of compiling all of that together in the final document, which fashioned itself after the Road to Emmaus story. So your first homework assignment, go reflect on John chapter 1. I always tell everybody to go do that. But your second major homework assignment is to read the Road to Emmaus story that we all know very, very well, but that I think can really push us all a little bit out of our comfort zones and allow us to understand the way we work with young people anew. It's in the Gospel of Luke. It's this beautiful story. We all know it, right? Where Jesus Christ meets these two disciples along the way. They're walking away from Jerusalem, and he has a conversation with them. And so based off this Road to Emmaus story, the final document has three kind of main movements, three main headings. The first section is all about how Jesus walked with them. The second section is how their eyes are opened. And then the third section, they left without delay. So Jesus Christ walking alongside, Jesus Christ explaining, and then Jesus Christ inspiring. And I think those three kind of movements within the final document also have to become movements within our ministry. You know, the main topic of this webinar is what was the Synod and why does it matter? And I think that the reason that the Synod matters is because what happened at the pre-synod, what happened at the Synod, and what's reflected in the document is a model of what we are called to do. Right? The Synod was not just, again, this political ploy of conversation, but was really a snapshot of what our ministries can look like. I mean, one of the most beautiful things that happened at the Synod, and I was not there in Rome in October, but I saw pictures and I talked to people that were there. Pope Francis was present every single day at the proceedings, except on the Wednesdays when he had papal audiences in the mornings. But he was there in the room listening to the interventions, the short speeches that everybody got to give, and engaging in the discussion and the conversation that's being had and the prayer. Right. One of the things that he first encouraged at the beginning of the Synod was that after every few interventions, there was going to be a time of silence to really pay attention to the movement of the Holy Spirit. And there was this one particular day where Pope Francis comes into the Synod Hall and he's sitting down, you know, he's getting his stuff together down at the big table you saw in that picture a few moments ago, the big table where everybody, you know, all the important people are setting up their stuff. And I mean, he's the Pope, so he's smack dab in the center, right? And the story goes that he set his bag down and he kind of like scanned the room for a moment, and he started climbing the stairs of the Synod Hall, of the aula, the classroom, so to speak. He starts climbing the stairs of the Synod Hall up to the area where the young adult auditors, so there were about 30 or 40 young adults present at the Synod proceedings in October who were able to contribute to the small group discussions and debates and interventions themselves. He starts climbing up the stairs to go talk to those people. And I think it's a snapshot of how we're not called to just proclamate. We're not called to just pontificate. Even the Pope himself has said that. We're called to be people who are unafraid to go to the other and have a conversation with them where they are. And then to challenge them where they are to go to where they're called to be. And Pope Francis literally did that in a physical manner by climbing the stairs and going to have a conversation with these young adult auditors and these press pass members. And the story goes that as he was talking to them, he told them, keep making noise, keep being loud, because all throughout the proceedings of the synod, the young adult auditors would clap when they liked an intervention, and would offer encouragement or excitement when they heard things that they liked and that reflected their own hearts. And so Pope Francis encouraged that. He walked with them. He literally climbed the steps to walk with them. He listened to them. He had a conversation with them. He invited them. He challenged them. So what I want to do in the few minutes that we have remaining together is kind of go through both the document itself and point out a few key quotes that I think are important for us in our ministry, and lay that against the framework of the story of the road to Emmaus. And so we'll start with part one. He walked with them. And remember, I said that there was this transforming power of listening that really came out throughout the course of the synod document and the synod proceedings and the conversation. And there's this beautiful quote right from the beginning of the final document, that listening is an encounter in freedom, which requires humility, patience, readiness to understand, and a commitment to formulate the answers in a new way. Listening transforms the hearts of those who do it, especially when it takes place within an interior disposition of harmony and docility to the Spirit. So it's not just a gathering of information, nor is it a strategy for achieving a goal, but it is the manner in which God himself relates to his people. So this is important, right? That listening isn't just something that we do on behalf of the person that we're listening to, but it's really something that changes us internally, that softens our spirit, that opens our mind, that pushes us outside of our comfort zone. And it's often outside of our comfort zone where virtue is required. And it's often outside of our comfort zone where holiness can grow, right? And when it takes place within, like it says, this interior disposition of harmony and paying attention to the Spirit, we're listening to the young person, not just because we want to know what they think or because we want to understand their ideas, but because we really want to grow close to them, because we want to do for them what Christ does for us. The document continues that sometimes when we encourage or when we engage with young people, there's a tendency to provide these prepackaged answers and these ready-made solutions without allowing young people's questions to emerge and their freshness and engaging with the challenges they pose. Right, when we sit down with young people for dialogue, for discussion, whether it's a small group conversation at a confirmation prep program, or young adults that have gathered together at a theology on tap, or they've shown up at a retreat to teach them how to pray, or you're just meeting with a young adult for coffee, right? When we sit down with them, sometimes they have questions, sometimes they have insights, sometimes they have struggles. And we, from the church's perspective, as the document says, have this tendency to jump in and be like, well, this is what we teach. And we grab our Bible and we thump it in their face. And it's not that we're not called to proclaim the truth, but we're called to proclaim the truth in charity. And sometimes that charity hasn't been developed if we've just gone in ready to speak and not listen. You ever met somebody that it's very obvious that as you're talking to them, they're thinking of what they're going to say in response? That's not what we're called to do in the ministry of the church. And the synod basically poo-pooed that idea and said, no, we arrive docile to the Spirit and ready to listen and ready to engage first with our ears and then with our mouths. The document continues that listening makes possible an exchange of gifts in a context of empathy and feeling alongside the other. It allows young people to make their own contribution to the community, helping it to grasp new sensitivities and to consider new questions. At the same time, it sets the conditions for a proclamation of the gospel that can truly touch the heart, incisively and fruitfully. You ever encountered a young person who's really struggled with the faith? I distinctly remember meeting a peer in college. I went to a very conservative Catholic college, the University of Dallas in Irving, Texas. Great theology program, awesomely deep, faithful men and women that go to this school. The daily masses are packed. The adoration chapel is always full. The retreats are signed up for right away. In fact, the University of Dallas can claim that they had 2 graduates attend the pre-synod. So we're a super Catholic school, myself and Nick Lopez, the current campus minister. And even still, at this very Catholic college, there were a few people that struggled with their faith. And one of these young women that I befriended in my junior year of college, I remember she came to me one day and she said, hey, I just had a really terrible theology class. She was a sophomore. She'd chosen to not go to Rome like a lot of her classmates. And so instead, she'd taken the Systematics 1 theology class. And she was going into this Systematics class prepared to learn what the church taught. Now, granted, now this is an academic classroom. This is a PhD professor whose job literally is to answer questions. But she'd gone to this professor after a particular class where she was struggling to understand some different tenets of the faith. And she'd sat down with this professor and she told him, she said, I don't just want your answers. I want to understand. And in order to understand, I need to tell you what I first think. And he totally shut her down, completely cut her off. Now, again, PhD professors, they've got a lot of things on their plate. They've got a lot of time that is already very scheduled. So maybe he just wasn't in the right place to be able to have that engaged conversation. I'm not knocking the professor in this scenario. But my friend came to me and she said, look, I know you're a theology major. I know you talk to teenagers a lot. So maybe you can help me. She's like, I need to be heard so that I can hear myself say what I think and what I'm trying to figure out, when I'm trying to understand, so that I know I'm wrong. And that moment has always struck with me. She didn't want to just say her ideas because she wanted to hear her own voice. She wanted to say her ideas so she could hear herself say it, so she could begin to process it. And all she needed was somebody to sit on the other side and listen to her and kind of be a volley back and forth. I think the synod shows us, and this final document really shows us, how valuable that moment can be. Because I myself have been in those positions. Anytime I fought with my mom when I was in high school, I'd always yell at her, I just want you to hear me. Right? A lot of young people that grapple with the faith just want to be heard. And are we the kind of people who sit down and shut up long enough to just listen with that empathetic heart, to listen with that humility and the docility, to be aware of what they're going through? I mean, if you look at the Road to Emmaus story, this is the map, right? We know where they are. They're in Jerusalem, and they're headed to where? Emmaus. They're headed away from where all the actions happen. Jesus died and resurrected, and they're going, we all know this, in the wrong direction. And it says in the scriptures, they're conversing about all the things that had occurred. So they're having a conversation, and Jesus Christ walks, I imagine, like pops out of the bushes and starts walking alongside of them. Their eyes are prevented from recognizing him. And Jesus asks them a question. He says, what are you discussing as you walk along? I think the synod tells us that listening is transformative and listening is important, and listening begins by asking good questions. So one of the things that the synod teaches us, and one of the things that the synod impresses upon us in ministry, is that we are called to ask good questions to young people and then listen to their answers. So they say to him, the things that happened to Jesus the Nazarene, who was a prophet, mighty indeed, and word before God. So they start to answer Jesus's question, and he listens attentively. So Jesus himself shows us the transformative power of listening, allowing these two disciples along the way to unpack and explore and grapple with what's going on in their hearts and in their minds, what's happened within the course of human history that they were witnesses to and that they're confused by. Part 2 of the document. Their eyes are opened. Now, remember, we've got this transformative power of listening, and we also have this duty to proclaim truth. It's not enough to just sit back and be like, oh, yes, well, your ideas are good, and then walk away without ever proclaiming to them what the church teaches. And the document tells us the first conditional for vocational discernment is in the Spirit is an authentic experience of faith in Christ, dead and risen. Faith in Christ, who has died and risen from the dead, comes from an understanding of what we teach as a church. And it's in Christian communities that we sometimes risk proposing, even without intending it, an ethical and therapeutic theism, which responds to the human needs for security and comfort, rather than a living encounter with God in the light of the gospel and in the strength of the Spirit. We have a duty to proclaim truth, and that truth is not just a collection of facts and ideas, but is the truth that when we encounter Jesus Christ, we are fundamentally changed. We're transformed. And if we're not changed, Peter Kreeft says, if we're not changed, then it wasn't Jesus that we met. So the first condition is faith. The first condition to be a disciple is belief in Jesus Christ dead and risen. And we preach Jesus Christ risen from the dead, Jesus Christ who loves us intensely, by showing a living encounter with God in the light of the gospel. When Jesus encountered the young in whatever state and condition they find themselves, even if they were dead, in one way or another, he says to them, arise, grow. It seems clear that Jesus stretches out his hand not to take away freedom, but to activate it, to liberate it. Jesus fully exercises his authority. He wants nothing other than the growth of the young person without a trace of possessiveness, manipulation, or seduction. You know how you proclaim the truth without being manipulating, without being seductive, or without being possessive of that young person? You establish a relationship with them. You establish a relationship with them that was built on authentic sharing, that was built on you giving witness to your heart, and was built on you listening to them tell you about themselves. When I was a young youth minister, I worked with high school students at a local parish, and we had a pretty successful high school Bible study. We'd have 60, 70 young people coming on Wednesday nights, totally voluntarily. Our life team program, which was our catechetical program, had over 200 young people every single Sunday night. And as I was growing in relationship with these young people, there were a few teens that really stuck out that I was growing closer with. And I'd go to their sports events, and they knew my family and I knew their families. And they were young people that I was growing to love as a youth minister loves their young people. There's this one particular young man, his name was Brett. And Brett was very clearly living a double life. And not a double life in the sense of like he was doing awful, terrible things on the weekends and then showing up to church loving Jesus, but just in the sense that there were some people in his life that he hung out with those people and he would do certain things. And then he'd come to church stuff, he'd come to Bible study, he'd come to life team, he'd go to retreats, and he'd be a completely different person. And we all knew about this duplicity in his life. And so there was just this one particular day, I knew that somebody had to call him out on that. I knew that somebody really needed to kind of push him and say, look, if you're going to do these kinds of things, but then show up here, you have to eventually make a choice, because that's what we're called to do as people who walk alongside young people. We're not called to just leave them where they are, right? He loved the Jesus stuff. He loved coming to Bible study. He loved coming to life team. He loved going on retreats. He was always asking to give a testimony. And I'd always tell him no, because I knew that whatever testimony he gave was going to be colored by the fact that he was doing things that we all knew he was doing on the weekends. And so I asked him if he'd like to go to coffee one afternoon. He got out of school. He met me at the local Starbucks. We sat down, and I just kind of laid it out to him. I challenged him. I pushed him. I told him, I said, look, because we love you, because we know that you long for a relationship with Jesus, we have to challenge you. We have to push back. But we were only able to do that. I was only able to speak to him in that position of, you have to make a choice, because I'd spent so much time with him. Because I'd heard him tell me how much he struggled to go back and forth between these two different worlds that he was essentially living both times. His feet were stretched. He was crossing the barricade, so to speak. And it was because I knew him, because he knew me, that I was able to push back. When Jesus Christ encounters us, he doesn't just let us stay where we are. When Jesus Christ encounters those apostles on the road and he listens to them, unpack everything and try to grapple with everything, what is his response to them eventually? I love this line in scripture. Oh, how foolish you are. How slow of heart to believe all that the prophets spoke. And then he lays it out for them. Then, beginning with Moses and all of the prophets, he interpreted to them what referred to him in all of the scriptures, right? Jesus Christ lays down the truth. He's unafraid to share the truth boldly. And here's what happens. Here's what's so beautiful about that moment. When truth is shared boldly, and the Synod document tells us to proclaim the truth of the church to a world that is desperate for truth, tells us to preach the church to young people who are looking for a home, who are looking for a place to settle, who are looking for a place to belong, right? What happens after he shares the truth boldly to those two disciples he meets along the way? They urged him, stay with us, for it's nearly evening and the day is almost over, right? They want him to stay because they are so deeply moved by what he says. And so Jesus Christ is present with them. One of the things that this synod challenges to do is to listen and to be present with our young people, especially after we've shared truth that has transformed them. Right? We're called to accompany. There's your buzzword. If you're playing synod bingo right now, accompany, mentor, encounter. Right? We're called to be present alongside those young people. As the account of the Emmaus disciples shows us, accompanying requires availability to walk a stretch of road together, establishing a significant relationship. It is therefore the community as a whole that is the prime subject of accompaniment, precisely because in its heart it develops that drama of relationships that can support the person on his journey and furnish him with points of reference and orientation. If I think back to my own journey of faith, starting in high school and going all the way through college, there wasn't just one single person standing next to me. It was a cast of characters, so to speak, right? That supporting cast of characters for me, the protagonist, who showed me different lived spiritualities and different ideas and different concepts and different ways to live the faith. And then the document tells us, and this is beautiful, a good accompanier, right? There's no really good English word for that. A good companion, so to speak, is a person who's balanced, a listener, a person of faith and prayer, who is the measure of his own weaknesses and frailties. Hence, he knows how to be accepting of the young people he accompanies, without moralizing and without false indulgence. When necessary, he also knows how to offer a word of fraternal correction. Right? Take a picture of that slide and memorize it forever. If you're somebody that works with youth and young adults, this is how we're called to be, who know our own weaknesses, who know where we ourselves stumble and fall, but are able to walk alongside young people, not just moralizing and preaching because we think we're always right, but because we ourselves know that we are sinners along this journey too, trying to become saints. And sinners with other sinners trying to become saints, those are the kinds of people that get to heaven. Not people who think they're walking, talking saints already, dragging everybody else along. The third part to the document, which is where the Synod, I think, really challenges us to stretch beyond the comfort levels, is that they left without delay. And one of the things about the Synod is that there's this real concentration and focus on how all of us are called to holiness. And so these two disciples who at one point were confused, but then are catechized and taught well and who are accompanied, then are able to go challenge and push other people to an encounter with Jesus Christ. From listening to the word, we move on to the joy of an encounter that fills the heart, gives meaning to existence, and infuses new energy. The faces light up, and the path regains its strength. It's the light and the strength of the vocational response that becomes a mission towards the community and the whole world. Without delay and without fear, the disciples return on their steps to reach their brothers and witness their meeting with the risen Jesus. They feel a call to go give testimony. A lot of young people, I think, assume incorrectly that as a young person, they're just kind of in the process, rather than somebody right now in that moment, even in that particular state of youth. They are called to mission. They are called to witness. They are called to holiness. And oftentimes, young people are for one another beautiful witnesses to the mission that they've been given in Jesus Christ, to be able to give testimony and testify to how their hearts have been challenged and moved. We've seen this just happening in the United States in the past few weeks. At the very beginning of January, we had the Seek conference up in Indianapolis, Indiana, hosted by Focus Catholic, right? The Fellowship of Catholic University Students. 16,000 young adults, young adult college students, so 4 years, right, a specific age range. 16,000 young adults gathered together in Indianapolis for 5 days for a conference to pray and to spend time in fellowship and to learn and to listen to one another. And Focus Catholic did this really interesting thing. They had this thing called the Seek influencers, where they had a bunch of different young adults with Instagram profiles and Twitter handles and podcasts. They had a bunch of different people kind of gathered together to be these hashtag Seek influencers, to be able to gather together other young people from perhaps their followers on Instagram or Twitter, or just friends that they knew, to challenge them to sign up. And if you watched all of these different Seek influencers posting on Instagram and Twitter and sharing stuff on different social media outlets about Seek, they were giving beautiful testimony to what was going on in their own lives. They were witnesses to what was happening just with their peers. So yeah, sure, Focus had their own Twitter and Instagram accounts, but so many other people were sharing with their companions about what was happening, because they can be witnesses too. The church as a whole, at the moment in which the Synod has chosen to deal with young people, has made a very specific option. The church considers this mission a pastoral priority on which to invest time, energy, and resources to challenge and to push young people to go on mission, to be witnesses to Jesus Christ, to be accompanied by mentors who know their own weaknesses and frailties, but still walk alongside with that listening heart. The document continues. The synodal path has insisted on the growing desire to give space and body to the protagonism of youth and young adults. It is evident that the apostolate of young people towards other young people cannot be improvised, but must be the fruit of a serious and adequate formative journey. How can we accompany them in this process? That's an important question. How can we companion young people so that they can become people of deep faith and then be witnesses to their own peers? How can we offer better tools for young people to be authentic witnesses to the gospel? This is what's really beautiful in the story of the road to Emmaus. And it happened that while he was with them at table, he took bread, he said the blessing, he broke it, and he gave it to them. They share Eucharist, right? And with that, their eyes were opened and they recognized him. And then they said to each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he spoke to us on the way and opened the scriptures to us?" And what is their response? Their hearts burning within them, receiving the Eucharist, knowing the scriptures, they set out at once and returned to Jerusalem, where they found gathered together the 11 and those with them. Right? The model that the Synod sets out for us based on the Road to Emmaus story, based off of the text of the final document. And I think what we can hope to hear in the apostolic exhortation that, rumor on the street is that we should have by Easter, is that we have to ask good questions of our young people. We have to listen to those answers. We have to talk with them in authentic, beautiful, life-giving dialogue. And we have to spend time with them in community. This is not an optional task. This is what we're called to do. The Synod on Young People matters because this is the model of church that we're being called to. And I would go so far as to say, yeah, this is what we're called to do with young people. This is what we're called to do with middle-aged people. This is what we're called to do with old people. This is the model of accompaniment. And don't we all just deeply want to be accompanied? Don't we all just want a companion on the journey? Don't we all just want people that we can call up and say, this is what I'm struggling with, or this is where I'm really happy, or this is where I need friendship. I mean, look at the rise of social media. It's all because we want to be close to other people and we want to connect. We want to be asked good questions. We want somebody to listen to who we are and what we have to say. We want to talk and to share. We want to be with others. The final document ends it packs a punch. It says that we must be saints so that we can invite the young to be saints. The young are crying out for an authentic, radiant, transparent, joyful church. I love this line because in the pre-synod document, we wrote a line about how we desperately want an authentic, transparent, and joyful hierarchy. And from that letter that we wrote as young adult representatives from around the world, they almost took that line verbatim to say that this is what the whole church has to be, not just the hierarchy, not just the leaders of our church, but all of us. Only a church of saints can measure up to such requests. The young need saints who can form other saints, thus showing that holiness is the most attractive face of the church. There is a language that all men and women of every age, place, and culture can understand because it is immediate and radiant. It is the language of holiness. And here's the punchline, right? Through the holiness of the young, the church can renew her spiritual ardor and her apostolic vigor. It's through these young people. It's through youth and young adults, through that particular age of life when there's a vivacity and an excitement and a joy and there's no fear, right? The balsam of holiness generated by the good lives of so many young people can heal the wounds of the church and of the world, bringing us back to that fullness of love to which we've always been called. The young saints inspire us to return to our first love. I think the Synod on Young People matters for a lot of reasons. I really, really, truly do. And ultimately, I think the reason the Synod on Young People matters is because young people matter, because young people are called to holiness, because young people are called to be beautiful witnesses. And we, working with young people, are challenged and pushed to be the kind of people who witness holiness to them. So those are my thoughts on why the Synod on Young People matters. I'd love to take your questions. I'd love to engage in a little bit of dialogue. And I apologize if my daughter starts crying because I just saw on my baby cam that she woke up. So she let me get through the presentation and then she decided to pop right up like it was on cue.
Well, thank you so much, Katie. You definitely got a lot in there in this amount of time. As I said before, we want to offer.
Yeah, sorry I talked so fast.
Oh, no, not at all. We want to offer people the opportunity to ask some questions, and so we'll give them a second here. So many things struck me as you were talking, having been a theology high school teacher for 24 years and interacting with the youth. What would you say, since the Synod took place and since your whole experience with this, how have you changed in the way that you interact with the young people that you meet as you travel around the world?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I often have like brief encounters with teenagers. They come talk to you after a talk, or they come get their book signed, or they want to take a picture. And a lot of them, they want to see pictures of Rose, which I'm always happy to oblige. But in the past, I'd just be like, "How are you?" Or like, how's the conference going, or what have you enjoyed so far? But like super service level questions. And I've started to realize that, as a speaker up on a stage, I'm sharing a lot of my heart, and so in a way, these young people are really getting to know me. So it's not weird for me to then ask them a question that allows me to get to know them. So I've started to ask more pointed, intentional questions that can lead to really awesome conversation instead of just, very surface level, like, yeah, I hope you're having a nice time, like, smile for the selfie and move on. And it takes longer. It takes longer to go through a line of young people that want to talk, or sometimes event organizers might get annoyed because the kids aren't going necessarily to the next thing, but it allows me to actually meet them instead of just have these very brief casual encounters. And young people get enough brief casual encounters in life. And if they can have one authentic conversation, and I happen to be the person that gets to have that with them, I think it's worth it.
Absolutely. And so to ask those good questions, it's the art of listening too that
Yes.
you really
Yeah.
focus on. For sure.
Yeah.
Well, I have a question here from Matt. He says,
Okay.
great presentation, one of the best Ave Maria Press has done.
Good job.
And a
Thanks.
question for you. Do you think parishes should have their own synods within their church to discuss things that young people find of importance? Thinking that could involve the young people in the church and make them know they are valuable.
Yeah, so everybody should go look up the National Dialogue, which is actually a way that this is happening across the United States right now. And you can sign up and it'll give you a packet, really, a booklet of questions that you can already go ahead. I mean, they're I hate to say they're prefab questions, but they're really well thought out, intentional questions to be asked to both individual young people and within small groups. I believe it's nationaldialogue.info is the website for that. But yeah, a synod is a canonical thing, right? So like even in a diocese, a synod, SYNOD, can happen with the bishop's approval. I think summits are a little easier to pass along, and just to have, chats, to have these conversations, to really get a feel for where your young people are. And I think I've talked about this ad nauseum in my ministry career, but one of the best things I ever did as a youth minister was a super low key event called Jesus and Java. On Tuesdays and Fridays during the summer, we had 6:30 morning mass at my parish. And so we'd invite the young people to come to 6:30 morning mass. We had mass every day, but on Tuesdays and Fridays, we'd specifically invite them to come 6:30 morning mass. And then afterwards, we'd go to the little local coffee shop right around the corner, CC's. We'd pile into vehicles, and some kids would walk. And I had the parish credit card, and I would pay for the coffee and the donuts. And we'd sit down, and we just hang out. And it wasn't it wasn't Bible study, and we didn't thump our catechisms, and we didn't wear like organized t-shirts or, whip our rosaries out. We just hung out and had conversations. And some of those discussions led to some of the greatest things that we did in youth ministry. One kid shared that he loved to go rock climbing. And so we started doing an annual summer rock climbing trip at a place about an hour and a half away. And one kid, he had a lot of questions about the rosary, and he didn't quite get it because he'd converted, but his parents hadn't. And so we were able to start this little rosary. We called it the Hail Mary Club, where young people would get together to go to adoration and pray the rosary. But that all came out of just hanging out. So yes, the answer to your question, Matt, is look up the National Dialogue to get kind of a template of how to do that, and then foster event type things or just spaces to where you can have those really authentic, fruitful discussions.
Awesome. Great ideas. Kyle wants to know, any thoughts on what makes a good question?
Oh, it can't be a yes or no question. It has to be a question that can lead to a more in-depth answer. Roy Pettifee is the genius behind really good questions, and he's got a book coming out with Ave Maria Press soon that you should all purchase. But he's got a couple of really awesome website, I think podcasts, as well as some little web videos on his Facebook page about how to ask really good questions. And he also wrote a series of articles for Ave Explores about that very topic. But one of the big things that Roy always harps in, it can't be a yes or no question. It has to be something that's got a little bit of a gray area. And then I think the best entry point with young people, there's always a little level of narcissism with a teenager, as it should be, because they are missing part of their brain, right? It hasn't formed yet. Ask them a question about themselves, right? Something that they like or dislike, and then why. And that gets them going. And then the next thing you know, you can't shut them up. And that's a really good thing, because then you know that they feel comfortable enough to keep going.
Great. Jillian, she's a DRE and she's looking for a new she's a DRE looking for a new youth minister. What books and documents would you suggest I familiarize myself with in order to accompany this future young person?
Wow. Well, definitely the final document of the Synod and the Apostolic Exhortation that should be coming out soon, as well as the pre-synod letter that we wrote in March, which was from the perspective of young adults. Not continuing the journey, That's something completely different. And now it's escaping me. And I used to have it sitting right on my desk. The USCCB document on young people, which I'm sure if you just Google USCCB youth document, it'll pop right up, is a really excellent text, I think, to familiarize yourself with, just about like the framework of ministry in the United States of America. And I would also, walking alongside a youth minister isn't a matter of like knowing all of the material that they're supposed to know so that you can not, I'm not saying this is your perspective, but I think sometimes in parish staffs, there's an assumption that a youth minister just needs somebody else that knows youth ministry. And actually, a lot of times youth ministers just need somebody to vent to. They need somebody that can help them with some of the grunt work. So like as a DRE, if you're really good at logistics, sometimes youth ministers are not. That's not always their skill set. So to be a kind of person that can support them in logistics. But also, if you're going to hire somebody for a position to work with young people, ideally you want that person working with young people to get young people to Jesus. Well, if you're going to hire that person, you want them to know Jesus. And in order for you to be able to spot whether or not they know Jesus, then you need to understand your own relationship with Christ. And you need to be able to kind of take evaluation of who is Jesus Christ to me. So I honestly think the best book that you could read to accompany somebody in ministry and to do ministry yourself is the Gospels. And to really take a deep dive into sacred scripture and to become very, very close to the Word and the Word made flesh dwelling among us.
Okay. There are so many questions here. I'm reading through them.
Rose is back to sleep, so knock on wood, we're good.
All right, awesome. So let's see, Pat, how do we help young people feel part of the church where they also might feel excluded? For instance, LGBTQ.
Yeah.
She said, I meet with a lot of students who are wrestling with these two apparent competing identity. Was this discussed at the pre-synod?
So the LGBT issue came up very briefly at the pre-synod, just kind of in a matter of like, this is no longer a taboo thing for young people. This is going to be a really weird connection, but I promise there's a point here. So I don't know if anybody remembers the movie Love, Simon that came out. I don't even know when it came out. I saw it over the summer. I think it came out last spring. I saw it on a plane. It's where I watch most of my movies. The premise of the movie is that there's a young guy at his high school. He's a high school student and he is gay, but he's in the closet. Nobody knows that he's gay. And he meets another gay guy at the same school and they start chatting back and forth online. And so they kind of have this like little digital romance and they don't know who the other person is in real life. And they're both a little scared of coming out because they're scared to be picked on or they're scared to be, I don't know, isolated amongst their own friend groups. And, they've essentially been living this lie because they're gay, but nobody knows it. And so the movie is just kind of the tension there. So I watched the movie. I thought the movie was really interesting. I thought it was well made. I thought it told a story of intense pain. And then I listened to a Pop Culture Happy Hour podcast about the movie. And the guy in the podcast, who's a regular on this particular podcast, he has a 14-year-old daughter, and he went to go see the movie with his 14-year-old daughter. And his daughter said, yeah, it's a good movie, but like gay kids are just out. Like that's not a thing. Like secret gay kids is not a thing. Like it's just part of their zeitgeist now. And it kind of struck me. It was like, I'm 29 years old. When I was in high school, that was a thing. But now the generation of young people, of high school students especially, and even young adults, it's not taboo. I have gay friends. They know what I believe and I know what they believe, and yet we're still able to sit down and have a conversation over dinner. And like we don't yell at each other across the table. And so I think what happens a lot of times is that young people approach the church and they feel so isolated because within the church, we don't know how to just see them past their sexuality. We just label them as the gay kid. Versus my gay friend Megan, who I know is gay, I still love her dearly and she still loves me dearly, even though we have these ideological differences. There's more to a person than their sexuality. And so I think as a church, we have to get past, and I'm no expert on how to necessarily do that, but one of the ways is to not, mentally for us, to not think of that as just the gay kid, but as the kid that might be struggling with a lot of other things as well. Father Mike Schmidt's book, Made for More, is a really, I believe it's Made for More, Made for Love. His book on the LGBT issue is really a beautiful unpacking, I think, of how to grapple with that issue from a pastoral perspective. And he's a priest that's worked with college students for years. So he speaks from his own personal experience of walking alongside young people in that regard. As far as making them feel welcome, even beyond that particular issue, which is no longer taboo for them, and we said that in the pre-synod document, is to find places and spaces where young people's gifts can be used in the life of the church. And I don't just mean making them altar servers and lectors at the monthly youth mass, but like young people have a lot of young people have a great sense of design or like ability for using technology in new and innovative ways. Some young people are great artists. We had a young person express to us that he loved to paint, and so we gave him a wall in our youth house, and he painted a mural, and it's there to this day. And like for that young man, that mural was like a visible testimony of somebody cared about what I had to offer for the church. And I'm happy to report that the young man is now a seminarian for our diocese. And I'm not going to say because we gave him a mural, therefore he's a seminarian. But I think that the two things perhaps link together.
Okay, awesome. Well, I hate to say this, we have so many questions that we just don't have time to be answered. I was thinking as you were talking, though, maybe we could do this again after
Absolutely,
the
yeah.
apostolic exhortation comes out.
For sure. And if anybody has a pressing question, feel free to email me. It's just my name, DescKatie Prejean at gmail.com. I can't promise you I'll get to it within the next 24 hours because my daughter's sick, but I will get to it eventually.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much for that, Katie. Okay, let's see. As we mentioned at the beginning, we do want to offer you a little gift here. 20% off of any of Katie's books here, Room 24 Follow, as well as Lent, which will be coming out February 8th. And just use the promo code webinar0115 for today's date. Thank you so much. As always, delightful and so informative, and really so many practical things that we can take back to our parishes, to our families, to our friends, and really, share with you in the mission of spreading the gospel. So before we leave, we'd like to thank our partners once again, the National Conference for Catechetical Leadership, the National Association of Catholic Family Life Ministers, the National Association for Lay Ministry, and the National Federation of Priest Councils. If you're not familiar with any of these organizations, please check out their websites, which you can see displayed on the screen here. This webinar, as well as all of our past webinar recordings, will appear on YouTube, Vimeo, and the Ave Maria Press website at avemariapress.com/webinar-videos. Also, please mark your calendars for the next webinar in the Professional Development Series on Tuesday, February 5th at 3 o'clock as always. Gary Zemak, the author of a new book, Give Up Worry for Lent, will share how parish ministers can avoid anxiety, burnout, and despair as they serve the Lord and his people. And again, you can sign up at avemariapress.com/webinars. Again, Katie, thank you so much. Thank you for everybody who has attended this. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
All right, I'm going to hop off.
Okay.
I've got another call.